Let's take a look here at one of the content reports. This is our standard site content report here in the All Pages under Behavior. Now notice that under the page it gives the URL, but it only gives you the path. This is the part after the domain. The domain is not included as part of the URL here. It's everything that's after the domain. Now this makes sense if you only have one domain, but what if you use one account and one web property for multiple domains? Let's actually look at this conceptually for a minute. Now let's say here that you have 4 different subdomains. So I have my main domain, cardinalpath.com, but I have the www, I have blog. I have shop. And maybe even have some internal that's only for the internal staff. Now if I look at the number of page views here, it's useful. I can see how many different page views of each of these different subdomains are receiving, and I can get analytics and stats on each one of them to understand how the content's being used. This is normally how we would think of the analysis that we would do if we have these different subdomains. However, if you recall what we saw when we just looked at the content reports, this is not the way the Google Analytics is by default set up to track. So given that, if we have a report like this where we're just looking at this index.html, how many page views are we going to see if this exact setup is sent into one profile, one web property into Google Analytics? We're going to see the number of page views is 40. And if we think about this and say, okay, the home page saw 40 page views. But most of the time, I think that's pretty confusing because there is no one page that got 40 page views. Those were actually 4 different pages with 4 completely different sets of content with people who came in from completely different traffic sources and did different things. And so considering all of the different home pages of all of our different subdomains, including ones that aren't even available to the outside public as one page and then counting up all the page views together, most of the time doesn't make sense. It's not what we're intuitively trying to do. Now, the good news is Google Analytics is very configurable and will allow us to do pretty much whatever we want. So what we're going to use here is an advanced filter to tell Google Analytics that we want to see it in this format here, where we have the domain and then the page appended on after it in the full URL, and then count the number of page views separately. So let's take a look at how we might do that. I'm going to come here to the admin section, and I'm going to come down to filters. And I'm going to create a filter here. I'm calling it append the subdirectory. And we're going to select a custom filter and advanced filter. Advanced filters get a bit more tricky, and there's a lot we can do, but this is a relatively simple example. The first thing we're going to do here is we're going to say that field A is going to be populated by what we're going to extract. In this case, we're going to take the host name. Now, host name is basically anything prior to that first slash. So it's going to be www.cardinalpath.com or blog.cardinalpath.com. That entire blog.cardinalpath.com is going to get pulled in there. A lot of times we call this the domain. And we're going to say that we want to capture everything in there. In field B, we're going to capture just the request URI. This is that path. It's the slash and everything after it. So looking up here at the URL here, this part that I've got highlighted, this is going to be what we capture as a host name. And then the request URI is going to be everything after that. And we're going to store that over here in part B. I like to think of this almost like in a calculator where you have a memory function. We're going to take the host name, save that into memory. We're going to take the request URI, save that into memory. And then what we're going to do is we're going to output this, and we're going to construct a new request URI. So this filter, remember these are destructive filters, meaning that as the data is streaming into Google Analytics, we are rewriting what's going to be saved in each one of these fields. And what we're going to say is, forget what was in the request URI before. We've saved that into memory. Instead, I want you to output to that area what I've got here. And I'm going to take those variables that I've saved in A and B, and I'm going to combine them together. So remember here, what was in A1? Well, A1 was our host name. And then right on the end of that, I'm going to output what was in B. And B was our request URI. In other words, I'm going to rebuild this URL. I'm going to take the host name, and I'm going to combine that with the request URI, put them all together to recreate this entire URL. And I'm going to put that in the request URI space. So all the reports that used to use the request URI are now going to have this new combined one. And then you can fill this out just as I've got it down here. A required yes, B required no, override output, and then no in case sensitivity. Now, once we do that, we save this and apply it, what we're going to see is that exact setup where I've got the domain, and then I've got the path, where I've got the host name and then the request URI appended onto the end. So in this case, it's not just the slash for the home page anymore. In this case, it's actually the domain and the slash. So what I would see here is exactly what I saw on the PowerPoint. If I had 4 different subdomains and each one of them has a home page, I'm going to see all 4 of those subdomains and the slash, so the home page for each one of them, as 4 different line items. So here I've got training dot, I've got www dot, I've got the different domains are broken out and they're not combining those home pages together. So a really useful thing to do if you do have multiple subdomains that are coming into the same web property. Now I have a couple pieces of advice here. First is that you can have your cake and eat it too. You don't have to choose one way or the other. In fact, you definitely should just keep your original view as it was. Don't touch that one. Start a brand new view, what we used to call profile, for this one, and name it appropriately. And in mine, I'm going to call this the subdirectory appending, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to create that filter, and I'm also going to say that this is appending the subdirectory on there. Make it very clear that when you go into here, you're going to have the subdirectories. And the second thing we can do is actually test if this works through real time. So remember, anytime we apply these filters, it's going to start from this point on, which is another reason why it doesn't make any sense to apply this filter to an old profile, because you're going to have this mix of time where it was appended and time where it wasn't. So definitely best to start from a new. The problem there is that it takes some time for these to show up. So again, I want to use a trick where we can use real time to show this particular filter is working. I want to come here and come down to content, take a look at the pages that are on here, and then I can go and put in some different subdomains, load up the pages. And as you can see, I have the user come on, and then the new one came on here. And my content is what I want it to be, which is the full host name and the slash after it. I can try a couple other things here. And we see here the query.html just came up on there as well. So using real time, I can tell and make sure this filter is doing exactly what I want it to do. I don't have to wait, come back, check a week, and find out that I was slightly off. I can test that right away, even though it's going to start from this point on. This is just scratching the surface for what we can do with advanced filters, but it's a great example to show how they work with a very useful filter example that I've relied on for over a decade now. If you have any other filter use cases you'd like to walk through, shoot me a tweet and we'll put some of the most interesting ones up.